All right, welcome to the new JFK Show, number 225. We've got one of our favorite guests, Phil Nelson. Now, if you were watching our last show, we were finishing up on one book, and we're going to go straight into the Martin Luther King book. So, Phil, welcome to the show once again. Larry, appreciate you being here, and Dr. Fetzer. And go ahead, we're going to let you take over, Phil.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And I'm sorry about last week. I lost track of my schedule. Well, I think as Jim knows, I know he knows more than I do about all this, but for a long time, we've known a lot about Lyndon Johnson's involvement in the planning and execution, and especially the cover-up of the JFK assassination. So that's not big news. However, this fellow coming in out of the blue, so to speak. I mean, he had no involvement in JFK research other than what impacted his own life personally and directly and rather violently, suddenly.
And who do you mean, Phil?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, when the book I'm referring to is called The Inheritance.
Oh, right. The Inheritance. Yeah, go ahead.
And we discussed that the last time.
Yes.
In some depth, but we left hanging because I didn't have my thoughts together or notes or anything about the question of, what he has brought to the table in regard to connecting Lyndon Johnson to everything that happened. And my point I was trying to make in a general sense last week was that there was a continuing recurrent theme throughout the book. I mean, there were numerous references to Lyndon Johnson, how he was behind, sort of in the shadows, running things essentially. And I was just making the point that we've known that for some time, that he had been planning that for not just months, but actually years, I think, even probably decades, at least according to my own thesis.
So Phil, can I just say this real quick? In a nutshell, we have the watch that President Kennedy was killed with. It was taken, what didn't go through the chain of command through the FBI and the Dallas police. It had DNA and other evidence, and Robert Kennedy hid the evidence, and then through a series of events, it changed hands, and Lyndon Johnson was doing everything he could to get his hands on it. Is that basically it?
Yes, but that's
the mercury is what's really important here, Gary.
The mercury would change the bullet. Right.
The key piece of this evidence is that the watch, well, first of all, let's back up just a second here to say that on the morning of the assassination, Johnson's own Secret Service agents, led by Rufus Youngblood, were involved in going to JFK's suite and obtaining from him all of the metal that he would ordinarily wear during the motorcade. And that included that watch, but it also included his cufflinks and a St. Christopher medal, another kind of medal, a Catholic type medal. Also a money clip, which had its own replication of a St. Christopher image. And that had been contained within his wallet. And the idea was that they were going to do a radiation check, which they did occasionally back in Washington, but they weren't really prepared, nor did they intend to do a radiation check. And that all came out in the testimony of Robert Bowick in the book. It's not something I'm making up here. That is what he reported to Christopher Fulton, the author of that book, and the man who's wound up spending nearly a decade of his life running from, being...
They were worried, Phil, that the metal might deflect some of the bullets.
Yes, that was the purpose. They wanted to make sure that he had no metal on him, so that would not be an issue. But they didn't realize that after they did that he asked Jackie what time was it, and she said, "Well, here, why don't you take this watch? I just got this back from I had it serviced. This is your old gold Cartier. So just put that one on." So he did. And that was the one then, ironically, that had it not been for that, that evidence would not exist. And it's clear-cut evidence that was contaminated by the mercury in the fatal bullet. And the reason it was is because he had his hands up like so, and the watch was exposed. So when that bullet hit, there was a shock wave created by the supersonic nature of the bullet that didn't shatter, but it put striations, as Christopher.
No, the watch was on which wrist was the watch on?
Left wrist, and it was like so.
It was on his left wrist?
I believe that's true. As I recall it from the photo.
Because, David has now concluded that Jack also was shot a third time, and it was from the south knoll, and it might very well have been that bullet that caused the mercury onto the watch rather than the entry in the right temple.
It could have been. Are you referring to David Manick then?
Yes.
Well, in any event, as he reported, having had this explained to him by this Secret Service, not just a Secret Service agent, he was a high official, and he was in charge of something called the Protective Services Division, and he was the fellow who, felt so much guilt about what happened because they missed all this. Well, anyway, to cut to the chase, that all of that other property had been taken away from him for that purpose, and actually Johnson's Secret Service agents then attempted later to log that Omega watch that they had taken away as something that they took off of his body, okay, along with the other things. But they realized that, when it showed up separately and it was reported separately, this other watch, the Cartier, had been found by a nurse and then given to the Secret Service, and then Robert Bowick had it. It was there reported, firsthand that it was taken off his body. So they couldn't do that anymore. And those, again, were his own Secret Service agents who had been set up to do that.
Just look how thorough and diabolical was Lyndon Johnson in setting up the assassination, that they even used Secret Service agents to remove the jewelry from JFK so it wouldn't deflect any of the bullets. I mean, this is just disgusting.
Yeah, well, he had spent most of the month before the assassination working out these kinds of details down at his ranch. And he was, even according to Christopher Fulton. Now, and this is the part that amazes me, because Christopher Fulton, again, really had not studied all of these issues. He didn't know Lyndon Johnson's habits and so forth, but somehow he through Secret Service man Robert Bowick learned all of these things, such as Johnson was on the verge of a breakdown. He hid away at his ranch in Texas whenever possible. And that goes right back to the very month before. He was there for practically the whole time. 90% of the time he spent at his ranch. And it was all about planning for, guess what, the motorcade and the details. And this is one of the details that he obviously thought up down there on the ranch. So anyway, all of this goes back to, a number. There are probably 20, 25 references that throughout this book about Johnson being behind all of it. And I think that goes back to why these fellows from Kappa are so disenchanted with this book, so apparently upset about it that they've even misrepresented what it says.
Well, they're apologists for LBJ, Phil. They're trying to take him off the hook on which you have so firmly impaled him. It's a disgrace. This is further infiltration of the JFK community. It's what Cass Sinstein described as cognitive infiltration. It's a disgrace in and of itself. And we are doing our best to expose this.
Yes, and I think, I owe a lot of everything I know about it to you, Jim, and I appreciate all that. So that is one of the things we wanted to just go back to. And I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to discuss about this book and my review that I circulated, 2 or 3 weeks ago of it. But I'm very impressed with the book. I think that there are so many little things like this that can be found in there that validate the entire narrative of what he's presented, that it can't be denied.
It's just extraordinary how one minor detail, a watch he was wearing, could have such vast implications about the organization and execution of the assassination itself.
Well, it's something that would even lead to him being incarcerated, Jim, for what, 8 or 9 years.
Yes, he was, and I brutally incarcerated. I mean, what happened?
I think so. In synthesis, what LBJ's role and how it connects to Mr. Fulton has to do with the
cover-up,
trying to make sure that that he wasn't wearing any medal that day. Because last week I asked you, I tried to, we didn't. I mean, 2 weeks ago I tried to bring that into the conversation. Where exactly did LBJ intersect into Fulton's book? Okay, so am I to understand and to interpret that that's the connection here?
Those were the major ones, but there were many throughout the book. Now,
okay.
I haven't tabulated all of them, but I did want to focus on.
Phil, you must have found this a refreshing breath of air, that it was so substantiating in such an interesting and unexpected fashion your thesis about the assassination.
Yeah, it validates practically everything I said in the book.
Yes.
What really amazed me is it touches again on some things that a person like that would not be expected to know about. For example, not that many people know about what happened in the aftermath with the lawsuits actually in 1966, 67, and so forth. When Bobby Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy had commissioned William Manchester to write that book, the murder of the president. He wrote the book, but then they got into these very difficult, controversies with him because they felt he had gone too far. And there's always been this question about why they actually felt it necessary to file this lawsuit against him and press him aggressively to drop some of those pages. And he wound up dropping over 100 pages out of his manuscript as a result of their forcing him to. And here in this book, that point is addressed more clearly than I've ever seen it addressed before. What it is telling us here is that his let me see if
100 pages, Phil?
Oh yeah.
What were they seeking to suppress?
It was all about this watch, and the whole thing that what I referred to, because what happened is that she had gone too far into some of these issues with Manchester in her initial interview.
Jackie
had, and when Bobby Kennedy learned this, now bear in mind that he was trying his best to not do anything that would cause.
Would reveal the existence of this evidence.
Well, that would cause a bigger rift than what already existed between himself and LBJ. He had to get through this so that he could run for president in the future and expose all this.
Once having become president.
Yes, and that's something that Johnson feared more than anything else.
And of course wasn't going to allow to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Let me just read you this little paragraph here. People have always wondered why Jackie Kennedy sued William Manchester over his book that was based on his interviews with her. The fact is, she recalled events too vividly, and Robert Kennedy was upset. She had discussed details about her wedding ring and what was on the president's person when he was assassinated, i.e. the watch. Jackie made a formal request to have the president's gold St. Christopher money clip placed with him in his coffin. Robert refused because he wanted to keep it as evidence. That clip was withheld from President Kennedy the day of his murder. Jackie had to sue Manchester to keep all those specifics from the public. And what happened then is that, as I reported in my first book, as a result of this conflict, and that he did delete about 100 pages. And there were others that they wanted also deleted, and they fought over that.
Do we have those 100 pages, Phil?
No. And they were put away for 100 years.
Oh, God.
And so they will not be released until the year 2067.
This is just ludicrous.
I don't think we're going to make it.
Well,
Completely ludicrous, Phil.
I'm hoping my grandson will make it, because by then he was born in 07, so he'll be 60 years old.
The whole point was to make it meaningless, whatever evidence was available that wouldn't matter.
Yeah, Phil, it seems to be in the JFK community, there's 3 places you don't go. Number 1 is the Z film alteration, Lee Oswald in the doorway, and LBJ's involvement. It seems to be the main ones.
Absolutely. That's the reason that both Bill Kelly and Larry Schnapp came out so strongly with really, just inconsequential and nebulous article, reviews of his book. They weren't even reviews. At least Larry Schnapp's wasn't.
Yeah, Larry Schnapp is a very, very unusual person. He just came on the scene in just a couple of years, and suddenly he's in Judy Baker's conferences. Now,
No.
I know the COPA conferences are completely taken over by Shields, but
I didn't think that Larry Schnapp had attended hers. He was at the
he was at COPA?
it was Capital.
Okay. I feel better now, because if he would have been at Judy's conference, I would have been very, very discouraged.
No, he wasn't.
He was.
Well, Snaps was at Judas conference. Of course he was.
He was not this year, but the year before, right after the Houston trial.
Right. I mean, I denounced him there for Christ's sake.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was thinking just of this past year, and I wasn't aware of it.
And this past year, they had a special conference there at the what's the name of that? The red building over there at the corner of Houston and Main Street, the old courthouse. Yeah, where they showed the 3D representations of the Zapruder film, which, and Jim and I have discussed this. They probably took it, from the work that we've done on Blender. The first rendering of Dealey Plaza, in 3D in order to gain a better understanding of the physical dimensions of Dealey Plaza as they were on the day of the assassination. And they had a very short, not a short, but the entire day of I believe the Friday before our conference, and they, or the Thursday rather, and they had, a gathering there and people that signed up, over the website and everything. And he was there. So, because I received emails about that.
I know.
But anyway.
Yeah, he's dancing around Dealey Plaza, infiltrating the JFK community, period.
I stand corrected on that point. I want to just mention 2 other things, though.
Atom bomb's no better. I'm sorry.
Of the many. The author, Christopher Fulton, actually met with John F. Kennedy Jr.
Right.
For this auction in 1999 or 1998, I guess.
Right.
He got a call from him out of the blue because JFK Jr. had discovered that he had this watch, and he was taking it to New York and he was going to offer it for auction. Well, the authorities, when they found out about that, put the kibosh to that, and the watch was not sold. And but right there within the auction, he received his phone call from JFK Jr. asking him to come down and see him in Florida. So he gave the watch to his wife and she took it back to Vancouver. And in the meantime, he hopped a train and went to Florida. He got there, met with JFK Jr. at his hotel, And they wound up meeting for like the entire day. First of all, discussing the watch and all that. And that's all outlined in the book. And then he had given JFK Jr. an interview. Okay. They videoed or audio tape, whatever it was, because JFK Jr. was planning to put a big expose about this whole thing in his magazine, George.
Is this where he tries to petition the Clintons?
Yes, he made the mistake of writing a letter to Bill Clinton and asking him to authorize the exhumation of his father's casket so that they could do a complete autopsy and examine it and come up with.
I'm given to understand that Bill and Hillary were proteges of George H.W. Bush, and therefore that was a colossal blunder unbeknownst to him.
Yes, and by the way, it's pretty much understood that the bill was brought along by the CIA all the way from his days in college, and especially when he went to Oxford. And I think that answers a lot of the questions right there. But the problem, I mean, the issue that he is presenting, he's not trying to put all the details, cross all the I's and cross the T's and all that. But he is suggesting, put it out there, basically, that airplane accident was not an accident. And that
I agree. It was an assassination. And that Bill and Hill could have been involved in it would not surprise me at all. Remember, she wanted to become senator from New York, and the person who could knock her off, the only one really, would be John JFK Jr.
Yeah, because as of the time that all of this was going on, in January, I think it was January or February of 1998, he sold that watch to JFK Jr. So it was no longer in his possession. When a month later he was indicted and then arrested a few months after that, and then basically channeled right through all the prisons, the worst prisons in the country.
Hoping he would be killed, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, they just tried to torture him, basically. They knew that he had a fear of flying. So what did they do? They spent a month flying him around from one prison site to another on airplanes that were basically run by, these wild-haired pilots who were intentionally trying to scare the hell out of him. On one takeoff, he said, as soon as they took off from the runway, the pilot made the airplane dip so that the left wing almost touched the ground. He's in there watching it, scared shitless. And,
yeah.
That went on for a month, Jim. It wasn't just one flight back to D.C. No, it was they would fly from one place to another. And
these are vicious, sadistic people, Phil.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable that part of the story, what was going on there, and how brutal all of this was. But the point I was trying to get to is this. So he's put out this idea that that accident was not an accident at all, that related to his discovery of this watch, and knowing from the statements of Robert Bowen and so forth that this was primary evidence that Robert Kennedy had discovered there was mercury in the striations of that crystal in the watch. That proved a conspiracy because there was mercury that was buried in there.
Yes.
And that he discovered himself by having a forensic test done outside the FBI, outside the Secret Service, by a private company.
Wow.
So you have that, and then you have this issue with Bill and Hillary's involvement, and also he has put out there that he had received evidence that Jackie Kennedy's eventual death in 1994 was a result of a cancer that they believe was caused by her exposure to this mercury, pardon me, the mercury that had come off of that bullet during
Really?
That's in the book too. There's all kinds of secret little things like the treasures in it. The book is amazing. You really need to read it.
But Robert Kennedy was the first one that had the watch tested,
Yeah.
right, Phil?
That's right. Yeah, but it was because of his insistence that it be given to Evelyn Lincoln.
Evelyn Lincoln, right.
He should hold it throughout her life and make sure that it does not fall in the hands of any government agency. And he named them off. He named to the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, even the National Archives, the JFK Museum. All of them. He did not want it to fall into any of their hands because he knew it would be hidden forever. And he wanted his heirs, specifically, not Bobby Kennedy's heirs, but he wanted it removed from the scene so that eventually, assuming he survived it long enough, he could run for president and he would have all his evidence, including all of that he could easily get back. But in the meantime, it would be forgotten and moved away from his own family. And JFK.
So 54 years later, we all found out. It took a long time.
Coming around now, and it's in this little noticed book published by Chris Milligan, and it's getting a lot of press within the JFK research community.
Yes.
To use that term. But aside from that, obviously, the New York Times is never going to know about it or review it.
Well, the thing about this, I believe, is that Chris, comes upon the watch by happenstance, and he really wasn't involved in any type of JFK research, and he writes this book, and outside of any type of connections with the JFK research community, and I think that's what makes this book so unique.
Yes.
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah, you know what? When Gail Nix wrote her book, Larry did the same thing that he's talking about. He read the book and discovered things that even Gail wasn't really aware of, little tidbits by telling a different story. So you can get a lot. Sometimes they don't even know exactly what they're writing in their own book. So it happens all the time. So you ready to move on to MLK?
Yes. Sure.
All right, let's rock on.
Okay. Well, where do I start with it?
Phil, I wouldn't mind. I mean, you can say as much more as you want about the inheritance because we can have you back again, my friend.
If you want to do the,
if you want to on time, so we have about 20 minutes.
There's no waste of time here, Phil. This is all invaluable.
Yeah, we still have a half hour to go. About 35 minutes.
Okay. Well, I can do that. I have been prepared to start on the Martin Luther King book, but let's do it that way then. But did either of you have a chance to so you haven't read the book, but did you look at my review that I wrote?
Yeah, I read that.
There are so many pages of documents, and there's 120 pages. I think it's 122 actually, in the back of the book with all kinds of redacted usually, but all just documents that prove the essence of his entire story. And yet that was not enough to suffice to satisfy these guys who are so anxious to discredit it.
Well, all you have to do is elevate your standard so that, this is trivial, Phil. When you want to discredit something, you can simply raise a standard for credibility and simply deny it doesn't satisfy an impossible standard. It's child's play.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what is going on there, because in Larry Schnapp's case, he's begging someone to present him just one iota of evidence that this might prove even that there was another shooter. That seemingly a very small hurdle to pass. Well, he passes that hurdle and 100 more that are much higher than that, and yet he hasn't responded to my rebuttal of his so-called review. I mean, it wasn't a review because he even admitted he hadn't read the book. I mean, that's what always gets me about people who come out, overreact to something they know nothing about. They haven't read the book. How can he possibly form a judgment of the book?
I mean, how does he get to stand up in front of on stage and say all this stuff? How did he get there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, because I don't know the guy, but I'm just stunned by it. That
Larry does.
He's a board member of this, committee against political assassinations. Well, they must not be that against political assassinations if they don't really want to find actual truths where the truths.
Right. He's a board member of the Committee Against the Truth about political assassinations.
Well, that's why Andrew resigned from that board.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know of any good people on that side of the COPA. I'm not aware of any.
Kappa.
Yeah, it's Kappa. Yeah, it's not the same. It's coming from different people, but I understand that little seminar they had down there didn't go over too well, and a lot of people were very disappointed by that. But I don't know enough about it. I wasn't there myself.
Well, people like Jim DiEugenio's there, and we've got Russ Baker, Robert Groden's a regular over there.
I don't think DiEugenio is welcome at any of these. That's a great irony there. Now to mention it, but he's not welcome back at Lancer. I don't believe he went to this Kappa, and I know he's not been invited to Judas. So
you want to catch him, man?
There's a great irony in that. He's supposed to be.
Well, you can catch him and Larry Schnapps on Black Op Radio every Wednesday or Thursday.
Oh, well.
Larry Schnapps is a regular on that show. It's just
to
show you how bad it has gotten.
Oh.
Yes, sir. Larry Schnapps, a regular on Black Op Radio. Let's think about that.
Len has just lost his way.
Well, I think he's been under DiEugenio's influence for far too long, and it was really DiEugenio, as you recall, Jim, who came out against my book, with this.
Over on their website.
Did you ever read his two-part assassination of Jim Fetzer, Phil? I had to do it's so easy to lie, and it can be so complicated to explain it. I had to do a 7-part series to rebut. Yeah, he didn't have a single argument against me, not one that had any validity. Well, not one. And he was covering everything I'd ever done.
Oh, yeah.
He even went after the Holocaust.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he brought that up. He brought so many things.
It was a disgrace, Phil.
Saying that holograms are being
the decline and fall of Jim Fetzer. Is that what they called it?
Yeah.
No, not the rise and fall. The decline.
Yeah, it can't be the rise because I've never risen. So it can only be my glory.
From the bottom down.
Well, he assigned the same kind of deal to this fellow who wrote that. Oh, Joe Green, and I was told by some intermediaries that Joe Green is willing to bury the hatchet. Honest to God, that was the expression used. After having done the hatchet job on my book, now he wants to bury the hatchet.
He wants to bury the hatchet.
Yet that review still stands at what was the CTKA website, is now Kennedy's and King. It's still out there. So as long as it's out there, I mean, why would I change my attitude about all of that? I mean, it was they clearly invented all kinds of nonsense to attack the book just for the sake of attacking it. And then I've since discovered that they have done that with so many other authors, including Peter Janney, Ed Haslam, Dr. Pepper. I wrote a very long response to that. In fact, it's Appendix A in my own Martin Luther King book. It's about a 10-page section called Appendix A about the people who are attacking William Pepper. And you talk about a wholly you know,
I mean, he's got to be one of the most credible of all is Dr. Pepper in the whole.
yeah, I mean, he's worked on this for 30 years, just on the Martin Luther King case.
Yeah, they said that Ed Haslam, the Dr. Mary's Monkey was one of the greatest books ever written. However, Me and Lee was the worst book ever written. So that's
Who said that?
That's Jim DiEugenio in action with his reviews, you know. So Dr.
But Dr. Mary's Monkey vindicates Me and Lee. So how can it be the case that the one is superior and the other is a failure? That's absurd.
Yeah.
I have to question that, because I named Ed Haslam right there because my recollection was that they attacked his book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually talked to Ed about that. I said, Ed, why is Jim DiEugenio, you know, trashing your book on his his podcast? And he said, Gary, he says, my books are selling like this and his books are selling like that. So don't worry about it. He's insignificant.
I wanted to go back to the Martin Luther King case and the earlier researchers. You mentioned Pepper, but I believe Harold Weisberg also did an incredible amount of work on the Martin Luther King. I've shared the website over there, the which has all those documents, on the King case as well as the JFK case. He doesn't get enough credit for all the work he did on the Martin Luther King case, especially on the aspect of James Earl Ray's innocence.
Well, in building my own case, I referenced, first of all, Dr. Pepper more than any other single author. And then the next person I referenced more than any other, second place, was Weisberg.
Right.
And then in building that case, I was referencing all of the credible authors who wrote, truth-seeking books, including a fellow named John Avery Emerson is his name. He was, by the way, the Avery was his middle name, but it comes from a family name. And his uncle was named Harry Avery, and he had worked for the Tennessee Department of Corrections. In fact, he was the chief guy, and he had discovered that he didn't think James Earl Ray was guilty, and he was trying to prove that. And he and his nephew, John Avery Emerson, contributed a lot to the story that I've compiled, because they were able to establish that Buford Ellington, the then governor of Tennessee, had been great friends with LBJ, and that all during the course of the trials and so forth, he had overheard conversations in the governor's office, about the need to make sure this trial never happens, or if it does, it's going nowhere. It's got to be killed, the trial, because they knew they didn't have a case against James Earl Ray. And that's why they brought in Johnson's other friend, Percy Foreman, this mob lawyer from Houston, in order to come in and basically hound James Earl Ray to death, basically replacing his original lawyer and his associate, William Bradford Huey. He was the author who basically teamed up with the original attorney, and together they were trying to pose as though they were always acting in James Earl Ray's interest, but at least Huey never was.
Let's talk a little bit about James Earl Ray as a suspect and how little he knew about rifles and about the in fact, I find it interesting, and you write about this, how that the rifle that they found had a misaligned scope, which is exactly what happens with the Carcano, which is found at the which is supposedly Oswald's rifle, in the assassination of JFK. I find those two parallels to be fascinating.
By the way, Phil, we're already booking you for next week, so you take your time here.
Okay, well, we'll plan to cover all that in detail then next week, Larry.
Okay.
I would just say, though, just offhand, though, that the guy who sold him that rifle tried to tell everyone, the police, the FBI, and 10 years later, the House Select Committee, that this guy, James Earl Ray, knew nothing about rifles.
Right.
I mean, nothing. And yet, he supposedly fired the fatal shot with only one bullet in a rifle that could have held 5 bullets. He only loaded it with 1 bullet, and he was so confident of his shooting skill, and he had never even hardly fired the rifle.
Supposed to be a sharpshooter, yeah. No, and the shot that he made was the proverbial, crossing the T, which was, the perfect shot that a sniper could execute.
Well, there are so many controversies related to where that shot came from and where.
Well, I'm talking about attributed to him, supposedly.
Yeah. Well.
You have a shot attributed to the bathroom of
the
restaurant, not from the bushy area where I take it actually was fired.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, we can cover all that, and I'm just wondering if we'll be able to use this split screen thing in other ways, I guess. When we
you mean the share screen, Phil?
Yeah, presentation. Yeah.
We can share. We can do a share screen all the time, anytime you want.
Anything that's on your laptop, we can see it.
Because I got a lot of photographs that I'm
good.
Yeah, that'd be great. We use them all the time. The more photos, the better the video.
Yeah, the videos. I got a couple of video clips. I'm working on some others, but I must have 100, 150.
Give us now what you'd like to introduce to set things up for next week, Phil.
Well, I'm going to plan to use that split screen and in a way that allows you to see it directly, but it also I might be showing as we go along photographs. I'll have maybe a small PowerPoint presentation or something like that. So,
right. Yeah.
PowerPoint is what we use all the time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll work on that. And anyway, so I don't know. Is there anything else we need to cover in regard to the inheritance book?
I think it's an amazing piece of new evidence that, as usual, anything that important seems to get resistance from inside our own community. Not much less the Warren Commission crowd.
Well, you're right about that, and we just named a few of the key suspects, or the usual suspects that are always there, ready to do that. And it's just damned interesting that they fought this thing so strongly. Just the whole idea. How can you possibly believe this?
Just an observation. I'm just dismayed that even Judith seems to have sold out, because when Gary articulates quite accurately the 3 key issues, Oswald in the doorway, well, Judith is on board with that. Zapruder film alteration. She praises Robert Groden to this day, which dumbfounds me. The role of LBJ, I'm unclear where Judith stands on that. Larry, Gary, do you have any thoughts?
I do. S.T. Patrick interviewed Douglas Horne last week, and he posted on his, Midnight Rider there on his website, and I highly recommend it. It's 3.5 hours, okay, of Douglas Horne presenting his entire case and research, and in his presentation, he takes exception to what Robert Groden did at the conference, at Judith's conference, regarding Sidney
Wilkerson.
Yeah, and their research over there because they're friends, and he just went to town on Robert Groden. There are some really nice comments on the website. I posted also because he mentioned our work on the motorcycle escort, the JFK Horseman, which was scrubbed from YouTube. When we posted the interviews that were done in 1971 by Tyler Newcomb's dad, Fred, and which Gary told me we had, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of views and likes and everything. And he mentioned how the limo stopped, and what happened, what those motorcycle escort talked about. But the entire presentation that Douglas Horn does, where he lays out his entire case, I mean, it's just incredible, Jim. You have to listen to. If you have time, I know it's a long presentation.
Excellent.
3.5 hours. You have to go to St. Patrick's website. It's there, and right now there's a lot of going back and forth, with comments and everything. And if you can go over there and post a comment, I'd really be grateful because.
Well, I knew who's on the right side here.
There were some shills.
Wow, Doug Horn is one of the greats.
There were some shills there that were, they came out of the woodwork like they always do, and they were, trying to, question a lot of his stuff, and Douglas, very patiently, he came out of retirement, to do this thing with St. Patrick, 3.5 hours, and I think.
What were the circumstances that he did it, Larry?
Well, because ST, apparently this what happened at Judy's conference, came to his attention, and ST and him are friends, and he said, "Look, man," and he really, really tears into Groden,
excellent,
big time. So if you guys have a chance, listen to it. It's really good.
It sounds like his assessment of Groden is exactly the same as our assessment of Groden.
Absolutely.
I stand
In reference to that conference and Judith not coming on strong enough for most of us there, I would say that about 98% of the people in that auditorium or whatever.
I didn't hear you, Phil. 97.
At least 98% of the people there would agree with us. And
yes, you mean about Groden, for example?
That he was actually going through all that stuff and trying to show that that the other work of
Wilkinson.
Yeah. In his mind, everybody is wrong except him, and he's saying, frame 317. That's not a black spot in there. It's the shadows. It
was just absurd. It was juvenile.
Yeah.
It was so trivial.
And it was so condescending, the way he spoke, and I was ready to throw up. I mean, everybody there was like,
it was so insubstantial. It was so lacking in seriousness. It was so unprofessional.
Yeah.
Larry,
such an entrenched idea that there was no tampering with the Zapruder film for the last 54 years that he's not going to give that up.
Mm-hmm.
Even you could.
That's right.
The most absolute convincing evidence, then I believe that their work is exactly that, by the way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there, as we all know. That was just one of the pieces.
Well, Wilkerson and her team put together 74 different professionals there in California, in the Hollywood, in that community, and they all said the same thing. That the film, is a composition. And they even describe how it was done, with optical printers and aerial printing.
Special effects, yep.
And how crude.
You have to listen because this is Douglas Horn at his best. I highly recommend it.
Okay, good, Larry. I'm glad you said this.
Yeah.
And S.J. Patrick vindicated himself because I've had my own doubts about him.
No, he was great. He let Douglas go off, like ST does. He just lets you. Reign free. He just gives you free reign.
Let me tell you what, when Doug Horn does an interview, he tells you straight up, I'm going to give a presentation and I'm not going to be interrupted and I'm going to go through the whole thing from beginning to end without any crap. And that's how Doug Horn is.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, it's sensational then that Grodin's half-assed remarks at the conference drew out Doug Horn for this masterpiece.
Absolutely. And I sent you guys an email. Check your emails because.
Oh, I know. I've got it, Larry. I've got it.
Yeah, go over there and post comments because I did.
But I really can't go that far to say that Judy has sold out. I will say that something's wrong and things are going astray at these conferences.
No, I just think that she treats him like a deity, Gary, and it's time, that he gets knocked off his pedestal. I think that's.
Yeah, but it's not just there. It's
he's got a group of people that back him over there. That guy that came out and talked about, the autistics, that he owned the negative, and he just. The guy was
absurd, Larry. That was one of the most absurd performances I've ever seen.
I know. And he said, "Oh, I'd love for it to be Lee Oswald in the doorway, but it's Billy Lovelady, And then he dropped that bomb and he left. He wasn't even at the conference, And he was one of Grodin's cronies over there.
There's just too many shenanigans. Tannenbaum giving Robert Grodin a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah, that too. Oh, and treating him also like, like he's the man,
Tannenbaum sold out, man. I couldn't give him any respect whatsoever from that moment on.
You tried to tell him too. You gave him a book and everything, Jim.
I did, Larry.
Yeah, they don't want the truth over there all the time. So, all right, fellas, y'all want to go ahead and call it on that and have Phil back?
Oh, we're going to have Phil back, absolutely. And if we don't cover everything next time, we'll have you again, Phil. We love having you here. Yeah, out of 225 JFK shows, Phil Nelson has been on 7 of them, so we know he's one of our favorite guests. Their last words, Phil?
Just to say thank you very much. I appreciate all that. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.
All right. This has been JFK number 225 with Phil Nelson, Larry Rivera, Jim Fetzer, and Gary King. We'll see you next week.